Good morning. Morning.
Morning.
Oh,
Can you see me okay?
yeah. Can you see me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Let me actually just go get another light because the lighting in my room isn't so good right now.
Yeah, go for it. We still have a few minutes, so no
Okay,
worries.
1 sec.
Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna wait a few more minutes to start right at 9. And we have another panelist we're waiting for.
Okay, hopefully that's a little better. How are you doing today, Vanessa? Is my audio working okay?
Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna wait a few minutes for the rest of our panelists, and we'll start soon. Hi, Amber.
Hi.
We're gonna start in a few minutes, okay? All right. Good morning. Good morning. It is 9 a.m. on a Saturday. So thank you all for being here. And thank you to our panelists. My name is Vanessa Diaz. I use she, her pronouns. I am the COO of We Represent, in addition to the director of creative communications. So anything on social media, you'll see I'm probably behind it, alongside with my colleague, Jane. So today we're here to talk about what it's like. Welcome to the What It's Like Borin panel. So I'm actually really interested to be a part of this talk because I did not do Borin. I was a 2014 Gilman Scholar to Qatar and a 2016-2017 Fulbright ETA to Jordan. And so just another one of the international exchanges that focuses on language study. And today our panelists will be so awesome as to talk about what is being a Borin scholar or fellow like in terms of academics or daily life, community engagement. They'll talk about kind of the day-to-day, their experience with the application. And yeah, let's get the conversation going. So to start off, we have Amber Demery. And Amber is an analyst with the U.S. federal government. She coordinates law enforcement and government agencies on briefings, products, and cases. Besides work, she's a young leader with foreign policy, research institute with the Pacific Forum, and a member of an international organization called Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. She completed her Borin Fellowship from 2014 to 2015 in Japan, where she studied Japanese and completed an internship with an Asia-focused human rights organization. So welcome, Amber. Thanks for being with us today. Then we have Dr. Elizabeth Lewis. She is a Haitian-American psychologist with interest in global health, mental health research. She's worked in places and lived in the U.S., Haiti, and Rwanda. And she collaborates with researchers, practitioners, and community members around ideas and things like mental health literacy, wellness, feminism, anti-racism initiatives, trauma, disaster, mental health, equity across different sectors, and affirming diverse perspectives and populations. And last but not least, we have with us Gabriel Davis. He is the founder and executive director of the Overseas Dispatch, a globally oriented grassroots social enterprise dedicated to encouraging creativity among people who are passionate from the world. In 2019, from 2019 to 2020, he completed his critical language scholarship and Borin. He was studying Arabic in Morocco. So thank you all for being here. We are really excited to learn from you. And just for the matter of time, I want to make sure all of y'all get time to talk. So we're going to have a few questions for y'all today. And I think we're going to start with just basic, why did you apply for Borin and why Borin? So we're going to start us off this morning with Amber, if you don't mind starting.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. And thanks for the introduction, Vanessa. So I started thinking about Borin approximately a year before I actually applied for it. I had a friend of mine, so I was a Borin fellow, but I had a friend of mine who was a Borin scholar who was very excited when she got hers. And I was like, wait a second, what is this thing and how do I do it? So I actually heard about it from her and found out like what it was all about from the scholar level. And I started looking into it at that time, which was a year ahead of time. And, just finding out more about it, finding out that I could study Japanese, live in Japan, and that it would actually be helpful for me trying to get a job afterwards. That's basically why I applied. And it was always longer. Like I had heard about the CLS and I had thought about doing that, but that was only for a summer. So this was a way to do it for a longer period of time.
Thank you so much. And I'll ask the same question to Gabe. When did you decide to apply for Borin and why Borin?
Well, thank you so much for moderating the panel, Vanessa.
You're muted.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you so much for moderating the panel, Vanessa. And it's an honor to be standing in the shadow of the giants on this panel. So I'm very happy to be here. But I think that what I thought about when I was looking at the Borin was, well, I really want to maintain my language skills. And the only thing I'd heard is you can't just do it over 2 months. You have to get in country for a longer period of time, because it's really that long length that will do kind of the hard, heavy lifting. And for me, I just thought, well, I've been learning Arabic so long that I'm going to kick myself if I lose it. So I also was considering government paths, and I thought that the Boren would actually be a pretty natural fit for all of those. So I shot my shot.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. Perfect. So I'm going to start off then going to Elizabeth. And so, Elizabeth, what advice would you have to give to someone who's getting started with their Borin? You're muted. I think we're having some technical issues. Maybe you can come back in again, Elizabeth, and see if maybe that'll help. Well, I'll ask Amber then. What advice would you give someone that wants to get started with their Borin?
Yeah, I think my advice would be to do research, and to really think about what you want to get out of the program, what else you want to do with the program while you're in country, and just to make sure that you craft the best application. Because I guess I was kind of like Gabriel, I just kind of like shot my shot and went for it. But there are many other programs. For instance, if you're interested in doing research, there's Fulbright. If you're interested in just a quick summer abroad, there's CLS or other study abroad programs. So for Boren, it's very flexible, I would say, particularly for fellows. So if I just feel like you need to think about what you want to do. Is it only language study? Is it language and interning? Is it language and something else? And just craft your best application and explain to them why you would be the best person in what you'd learn and how you'd use it in your future endeavors.
For that, let's see, Elizabeth, if we can get your, I think we can hear you now. Let's try again. See if you can try unmuting yourself. I saw you unmuted for a bit. Try again. Okay, try now. Okay. Okay, I'll just wait till I see you unmuted again. And hopefully we'll get to hear from you. But so Gabe, were you applying to other opportunities other than Boren?
I was. I wanted to, as you heard, I also applied to the Critical Language Scholarship, and that was in part what I based the program I designed for my Borin on. But I was also applying for something called the Center for Arabic Study Abroad, or CASA, which is based in Jordan. I was applying for graduate school. So I guess I was still at a point in my life where I was trying to figure out what the next step was. And whatever that next step ended up being, that's the one I was planning on taking. I knew I wanted to do stuff with Arabic and just language in general because I thought it was a really valuable skill. But I wasn't sure whether that path would be through formal study or through intensive language in country.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually remember I was in Jordan on my Fulbright, and I remember the CASA students, they're always like super dedicated to the language. And like a lot of them were fluent. So yeah, you were one of those CASA students. That's awesome. Amber, were you applying to other opportunities besides Boren?
No, I kind of just chose that one. I was like, this is the one I'm gonna do.
I love that you just had eyes on the prize and you're like, I'm gonna do that one and that's it. Very cool. Great. When I was applying to Fulbright, I applied to Peace Corps, I believe. So that was the other program I applied. And then I never knew about CLS or about Boren as much. Great. So in addition to language study, did you participate in any other components to your Boren Award, Amber?
Yeah, I did. So, when I was applying, I was in grad school. So I felt like, given that I was doing a graduate degree, I needed something more than just doing language study to kind of make sense for my degree and for my goals for after I graduated. So I also applied to internship with an Asian focused human rights organization, and I found it basically just doing research on my own in America. And I was like, well, I knew I wanted to do an internship. I obviously wanted to be in Tokyo because that's where I expected I would be living. And so I just really Googled like internships. I was doing like human rights organizations, international organizations, peace and security, all kinds of just like keyword searches in Google when I was applying. And when I found one that popped up, and I contacted them again from America and talked to them, and they had internships on their page, and they were very open to it. Yeah, they were very, very helpful actually at the time, because the program I was doing for my strict language study was not able to offer me a visa, and I'd be there for 9-10 months. So I actually got a visa through my internship rather than through my language program, which was very helpful. So I spent about 3 to 4.5 hours each day doing Japanese, and then the other half of the day I was interning at this organization where everyone spoke Japanese except for a couple of us interns.
Oh, wow. I love that. That's awesome. But that's like the way to get immersed, right?
Right.
Oh, Elizabeth, we can hear you.
Yay.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Yeah. Yay. Glad to hear you. Welcome. Thanks, Amber, for that. No, I was just saying that it's the best way to like immerse yourself in a language. I mean, the best way to learn a language is to immerse yourself in it and to, yeah, be the only person not maybe native in that language is the best way to like pick it up hearing and like saying a few words and stuff.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to add to that comment was that, particularly for Japanese, like doing it in a business setting is much different from doing it with friends on the street or even with like your professors. So that was another thing I wanted to be able to listen to and hear and try to speak a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's pretty interesting. In Arabic, I believe there's like the textbook Arabic, but that's only used in like amongst the like news reporters or like very official diplomats. So like the street language is very different than that. So Elizabeth, very glad that we can hear you now. Wanted to go back to the question and just ask, what advice would you have to give to someone who wants to get started applying for Boren?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I think what's been mentioned before is starting your application early. So I was completing my PhD program, so I knew I wanted to do a year abroad, and it wasn't like a traditional route. So I just really met with my the Boren program person at my institution, and then also just started speaking with my mentors and professors about it. So I think if as early as you can, if you can sort of start your application, and also you can also contact Boren if you have any questions, or just browse their website as well.
Actually,
Yeah.
Could I
Go ahead.
that for a moment? Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that is just that I would say when writing the Boren application, I was a scholar, so I didn't do the fellowship. But when writing the Boren application, I would say pick one issue that's relevant to national security and focus in on it pretty deep. I think that they prefer depth other than breadth, because I think depth demonstrates a mastery of the subject area. more so than just knowing everything there. So that's one piece of advice I would have for writing the application.
And then also if I could add, because I'm a psychologist, so I tied mental health, like disaster mental health, with national security. So it's possible it doesn't have to be like it has to be foreign policy based only. So you can also be creative with it as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess we'll go back to, so Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about like what was studying a foreign language like? And can you tell us what language you were studying?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a little bit different because I'm Haitian American. So it was my first language and I was born in the United States, but I wanted to just gain a little bit more, not like daily forms of it, but more mental health, medical setting sort of context. So I already had the basics. So it was pretty, so it went pretty well, but I just learned additional, like how to say depression or how to say certain symptoms within a medical hospital setting. So I found that it was very helpful. And then I just hired someone to provide me with those additional sort of skills that I could use in more professional settings.
Awesome.
And it was Haitian Creole. Yeah, that's the language I chose.
Amazing. Gabe, what was studying Arabic like? I know you studied it for a while, but
Well, it was hard. I mean, I think the big differences between the Arabic I studied in school and the Arabic that I actually studied in Morocco were, number one, what Vanessa, you identified, this difference between the street Arabic and the written Arabic, but also the fact that it's not just about how many words you know, it's about how quickly you can speak them. And the fluency there was hard. But I think, I think the other thing is just that it was a process of constantly putting myself in challenging circumstances each day. I remember one interaction where someone asked me to explain the Electoral College in Arabic, which I can't even do in English. So, it was things like that where I just had to say, okay, no, you're actually not going to shy away from this. You're going to kind of go towards the fire and just force yourself to try and find the words.
Actually, because Gabriel just made me think about something that's very funny. Because something very similar happened to me, but not for the Electoral College. But towards the end of my program, we were told we had to go into the park. I want to say it was Yoyogi Park. I could be wrong. And we were supposed to speak to regular people on the street just using the Japanese we learned in class, which we had all spoken, like we'd all spoken Japanese before. We all had Japanese friends by this point, but this was supposed to be school related. And so I wrote this survey thinking I was much more advanced than I honestly was. Wrote a survey asking political questions like, what do you think about Prime Minister Abe? Do you support the changing of the SDF and allowing them to collect the self-defense? I did not have the proper level of Japanese to do this, but I went out and did it. And people were answering my questions, and it ended up being very good conversations. Like Gabriel said, putting yourself in those difficult situations can end up being such a good thing.
I love that. Do you want to add to that, Amber?
Okay.
I mean, sorry, I looked at Elizabeth. Do you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
I think even it goes to show you, even though you've studied a language for years, but I think putting yourself in uncomfortable or just not familiar spaces is highly recommended, even though it's uncomfortable. So I hear my colleagues' responses. I could relate.
Yeah, that's I completely agree with that. I think the other thing that kind of thing forces you to consider, at least in my case, is really how you want to use your language. It really gets back to, is this language something I use to bridge my difference with the community that I'm in, or is this language a cudgel? I'll be honest for a moment and say that there were differences in Morocco I didn't expect culturally. And I think that there are differences that can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable. But the fact that you speak that language well enough to communicate those differences isn't necessarily carte blanche for you to do that. And so I think it really challenges you to also think about the cultural dimension of learning a language and think about whether it's your role to kind of be the outsider commenting on something inside, or whether it's your role to understand the context of what's happening on the inside.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Awesome. So what are some tips that you wish you would have known before applying? Elizabeth, I'll ask you this question.
I think for me, because I was getting my PhD, it's something, once again, it's not the norm to just in the middle of your, well, during your PhD year to do that. So I think for me, what I wish I would have known is to, I wish I would have known just, I guess, more sort of like scholars around my sort of academic trajectory who was successful, because I think in my institution it was years. There was a years before they selected someone, especially graduate at the graduate level. So I think it would have been helpful to just get a sense from someone, and also someone person of color, because I think at my institution I was the first person of color in a graduate program, and mind you, PhD program that received the Borin. So I think it just would have helpful. It would have been helpful with representation, because at least how my institution was sort of sharing information about Borin, or the pictures that I was seeing were mostly of white students.
Yeah, that is why the reason for this conference, right, is so that the representation that we've historically seen everywhere is white. Even what the perceptions that people see of people in Hollywood, it's very much misrepresented, or what people thought of a typical American looking like. At least when I was in Jordan, was definitely just blonde hair and blue eyes. So yeah, thank you for that. So this question goes out for all of you, and I'll actually have Gabe start first. So what was like a typical day for you, like as a Boren scholar, learning a language? What was it like? Just give us a little bit of a insider.
Sure. Well, the first thing that would happen is that my host father would bang on my bedroom door in the morning and say, Jabril, Jabril, and wake me up. And then I would have breakfast with them. And then I would walk to my language school, where I had about 4 hours of instruction. And that varied across the year as my level went up. But most of the time it was either me and one other person with a teacher, or just me and the teacher, which I also highly recommend. If you can get individual tutoring, I think it is awesome. But that being said, afterwards, I would go home and I would try and do my homework. And then at night, I did a lot of different things. Sometimes I would hang out with a couple of friends I made in country. Sometimes I would talk to my upstairs neighbor, who was the administrator of my program and was American. And sometimes I would cook, or I would have over guests. So I remember I had over a couple that was visiting from Libya at one point, and they were telling me all about what it's like in Tripoli. And so I was able to make them dates and milk, which is a traditional Moroccan greeting food. But then I'd just do some work and I'd go to bed.
Thanks for sharing. Amber, do you want to talk about what a typical day was for you in Japan as a Boren scholar?
Right. Yes, sure. So my fellowship, so mine was a little bit different, because so the program I was in for learning language the time of the day you took the language switched. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would have language in the morning, and then Tuesday and Thursday, I would have it in the afternoon. So on the day that I woke up and say I had it in the morning, I would get up. My host family would have breakfast ready for me, and they actually had a really great concept. They had about 3 or 4 of us at any given time. Basically, they had little name tags for all of us, and if you wanted breakfast or dinner that day, you would have to put your tag in the yes pile. So, like, if I wanted breakfast the night before, I would say yes. If I did not want breakfast, I would say no. And for dinner before I left that day, I would say yes or no to show if I would be back or not. So I would get up and I'd eat and I'd, take the train. I was actually living in Chiba and my school was in Tokyo. I would take the train into Tokyo to go to class for, 4-ish hours a day. Then I would go to my internship and, meet the other 4 interns again and, hang out and talk to them and learn about being in the Japanese business sector. And then generally in the evenings, I would either return home for dinner or might go out with some of my friends from school, or sometimes the school itself would plan events for us. Like, so one time we had like dinner at a restaurant in Japan where you catch the fish yourself in the restaurant and they will cook it for you. So that is part of the meal. So it's cheaper if you catch the fish versus if you just order the fish. So it's it makes it a fun thing. Or if like it was a weekend, I might go on a trip to a different part of Japan to see different aspects. But yeah, so it's mostly focused on learning the language, trying to use the language in my internship and otherwise, and doing homework and just trying to make sure I wasn't speaking English so much. Like I would speak English when I spoke to my mom, early in the morning when I could. But other than that, I tried to speak in Japanese even to folks in my Japanese friends.
I love that, Amber. Actually, when I was in Jordan, I had a rule for myself where I kind of didn't purposely make any American friends outside of the Fulbright circle. And I did that on purpose because it was just really easy to kind of get into the habit of only meeting people outside of Jordan, like expats. It's really easy to kind of get into that circle, but if you force yourself, then you'll have that immersion piece better. But yeah. Elizabeth, what was a typical day for you like in Haiti?
Yeah, so for me, I have family in Haiti, and I would go often. So for me, I was very familiar, but I was located in a different region. So a typical day, I just woke up. Sometimes I would make breakfast, or or a neighbor would make breakfast for me. And then I would just set out to walk about 20 minutes to the hospital. And on my way there, I would stop by to greet neighbors, or I would just observe what's going on around me. And I would pass the river. So it was like very scenic. So there was always a lot of busyness that I had to be mindful of, like motorcycles and cars and things like that. Um, and then usually when I got to the hospital, I would either work on my research project for Borin, or I would work with the psychologists and other mental health providers and visit different patients, or we would do workshops, and I would use Haitian Creole only. And then I would have lunch with other sort of expats and also local providers. That was one of my favorite parts, just to get to meet other people in different parts of the hospital and understanding more about oncology work or just different things like that. And once again, getting exposed to the language and the terminology used. And then usually I wrap up my time sort of towards the end of the day, just by taking an hour or 2 hour class with someone that I hired, and then I would once again walk back home, and I'll have dinner made for me already, like prepared, or I would stop by a local market to pick up certain things and try to bargain. And and usually I would just lay low and just like catch up on work, or I would take a local transportation called Tap Tap, and I would go and visit friends somewhere, or plan to see family members in the capital. So yeah, it was pretty sort of familiar, but also just having my own life there was also a different experience, instead of staying with family.
That's pretty awesome. I think it wasn't uncommon to go to a place that you have one or two family members there, because I know in Jordan there are some people that are like, oh yeah, I have an aunt that lives out here in Mafraq, or I don't know, wherever. So it does happen where people tend to go to a place that they're not very familiar with, like living there, but they have someone to go to for, like, I don't know, on a Saturday if they want to have like a home cooked meal or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's awesome you had that experience. Great. And then, part of Borin and all of these international exchange programs are like how you engage with the locals, right? You don't just want to be that American that travels and doesn't talk to anyone in the community, because it's not just about the work that you're doing, but it's like how people see you, how you talk to people, how you learn about their culture and their language. So I want to hear, we can start with Amber. How did you engage with your host country local community? And is there any ways in which, like, the work that you were doing either at your internship or with your language study, that it tied in with how you engage with the locals?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the project that I mentioned earlier is one way that it kind of tied in, like my interests, I kind of tied it in with the language and what I was doing with that. But mostly my engagement with the host country was just trying to be involved in as many things as I can, travel to as many places as I could. Um, Particularly like staying with the host family. It was my host mother and host father, and eventually later in the year when I was there, my host father's to his parents moved in also. We moved the house to a different house, and it was larger and everything. So it was, and just even speaking with them was a way of learning, because speaking to my host parents who were younger versus speaking to the grandparents who were older, so these are different type of Japanese, and of course they speak faster, and the older people, they cut off their words and they're still talking really fast, and you're like, okay, I'm trying here. But also, this is actually a story related to that. One of the friends in my program, so the language school I went to was very international. Anybody from anywhere across the world would come there, and everyone, we were all just kind of there trying to learn Japanese. And one of my friends was Dutch, and she was just on the street one day, and a Japanese fashion student spotted her and was like, would you mind being a volunteer model for my showcase? And she said yes. And so we all went to this Japanese fashion showcase for like these students who were finishing university. And everything's in Japanese. It was very cool, like seeing the Japanese fashion that the upcoming designers were doing. And so just kind of engaging in things like that. Like when you're there so long, you have such a chance to get that really involved and to see different parts of the country and the culture that you can't see in 2 months, or you can't see while you're overseas. So just very much trying to be involved in weird things, like take a weekend vacation and go to the mountain where everybody is like having a picnic and just join them. Yeah.
That. What about you, Gabe? How did you engage with your host country local community?
Oh gosh, there are so many ways. Well, I think Amber was right on the money. I think it's about traveling. It is about seeing the things that other people in country are seeing, especially the locals, just because that creates a context of familiarity with people that I think is really valuable to bridging connections and creating those connections. But I think explicitly, there were several different ways that I got involved. One was directly through an internship arranged by my language school, which, like Amber, I did after school some days. I actually worked in a Moroccan lawyer's office, and I probably spent more of my time there trying to figure out what legal jargon Moroccans were using to describe X or Y concept than I did actually helping. But that being said, I like to think it was a mutually beneficial experience. So I was able to figure out a little bit about the laws. And then in the second semester, I actually had enough time in my afternoons that I decided to enroll in Spanish classes at this local language institute at night. So twice a week, I would actually take Spanish classes I was the only non-Moroccan in the class. And so the instruction was in Arabic and I was learning Spanish, and it was a real head trip for me. But I really enjoyed that. And I think the last way I did was almost trying when I tried to share what I was bringing from the United States with people like my host family or people like the local community. For example, I remember one night where my Moroccan host family said, "Let's go out to pizza." And so I said, "Oh yeah, pizza." And then it turned out that the pizza had tuna on it, which is a very popular topping in Morocco, but is something that I have never seen on a pizza. So I said, "All right, that's it. We're making American style pizza here." And so I actually led a cooking class for my host family on how to make what I think of as just a very classic margarita pizza.
I love that. That is like so meta. It's like studying a language while you're studying a language in a different country. And that the instructions in the native language. So that's like, that's a whole other level. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. What about you, Elizabeth? How did you engage with your local community in Haiti?
For me, I volunteer at a school, so a school in my neighborhood, because in Haitian culture, sometimes there's misperceptions of mental health, and especially with child development. So I visited the school and I led some activities with the children, just to break up their day, and then also provided some training sessions for parents and then also teachers about child development and mental health, and addressing cultural taboos. So that was a pretty great experience, that I was able to connect with families. They invited me to their homes. I was able to really get a sense of some of the challenges that, especially a few of the children who had disabilities were facing. So that was like additional sort of thing that I didn't know. And then also participating in local sort of initiatives like gender-based violence initiatives. So really understanding more about the presence of that and some of the grassroots efforts that were being done at that time. And then also visiting some historical aspects in cities and landmarks of Haiti, especially since we were the first Black republic to gain independence in 1804. So really being at the different places where men and women of Haitian descent, and just seeing the areas and the significance of everything was really helpful. And then sometimes I would take out like my driver or my cook, or just employees who weren't in the mental health field, but like they still contributed a lot to making things happen in the hospital. And I would just take them out to eat or beer, or we'll go dancing, just to really just like get a sense of like outside of our work environment, like showing appreciation to them.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think connecting with locals is, like I said, is amazing. People that are not, that especially like not American, non-Americans. I think it's really important. I know that I definitely like went out salsa dancing, or like, I don't know, did a bunch of hikes and met random university students. So yeah, it's always fun to connect with people on different levels. Cool. So how did Boren support you through the year, Amber?
Yeah, actually, let me go back one on that previous question. So I just want to throw out for any of the students who are watching this, like, you can all in terms of immersing yourself and interacting in local country, like I also went to concerts. Like you can do things that are extremely fun. The concerts will not be in English. Like there's just small things like that that you can do that you don't think about as immersion, but you are having to listen to and hear and learn the language when you're doing these fun activities too. So in terms of how Boren supported me, I will say for Boren, particularly for the fellowship, I'm not sure if it's different for the scholarship, but it is very hands off and kind of laissez faire, I think, which I actually really liked. But the way that I found them really supportive was my program. Generally, the one that I found generally required you to pay for the first, I think, 6 months up front, and then like you pay for like however long you plan to stay there, you have to pay for the majority of it up front. But Boren does not pay on that schedule. Boren pays on a specific schedule. They pay a certain amount of time, like I think amount of money. I believe it's like every 3 months or something like that. And so I had to speak to the school to actually get their approval to pay them on a schedule they were not used to, in terms of in which at some point they would be deficient because I would still be there taking classes and they were not getting paid just yet. But Boren was helpful to me in always being in contact, like giving me a copy of things that I can provide to school to show that I would actually have this money to pay. And they were always responsive to emails in general, even though they were in an entirely different time zone than I was across the world. I think on the other hand, like given what this panel is about and what this program this speak is about is they are very hands-off. And so if you are a person of color necessarily in a country that you might not fit in or you've never been to or don't really know how to interact in, they're not very helpful in that respect. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I kind of just liked being dropped in the country and just like saying go forth. And I had already been to Japan before, so I mean I'm not going to imagine that there's going to be people looking like me in Japan. It's not a surprise. But if you are a new student and you're trying to do something where you have a lot of support and you don't kind of feel, or where the school or program will be able to help you understanding being a foreigner in the country, Bourne doesn't really have that kind of um, constant program communication. I mean, I'm sure they would if people asked them or spoke to them while you were abroad and you had questions. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of make that differentiation. So it's kind of, they are very supportive and very helpful when you have questions or anything administrative and everything like that. But it might kind of fall short in the PLC class.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's how a lot of programs are, right? And this is why the conference exists. So people can see themselves, even if it hasn't been a lot of people, like if there hasn't been a lot of like Hispanic folks going to, I don't know, Croatia, for example, they can like reach out and stuff. And I think for the most part, alumni are really willing to talk about their experiences and to help out. Even to the point of like creating spaces for themselves and communities and stuff. I know this is a Boren panel, and I know for myself, like with Fulbright, there's been a lot of underrepresented groups that had to create their own affinity groups to create these online spaces for resources, for tools. Like, how do you help someone that is going to be the only Black person in their cohort going to Poland? Like, that is a very real thing. And those experiences are important. And it shouldn't mean that you shouldn't go to those places. It just means that you need to have the right tools and kind of mindset and be prepared for the types of for that experience that's going to be uniquely yours. So yeah, thank you, Amber, for speaking on that. I think we have time. I haven't seen any questions right now, so I'm going to extend the question to Elizabeth. How did you feel supported by Boren?
I think similarly as Amber mentioned, they were pretty hands off, and they trusted me with my idea of my project. And even when there are situations in which, because sometimes the U.S. government has Haiti on a higher level, and the ground is a little different story. So I mean, I won't go into that, but it's just that they never were concerned about my safety. They weren't like threatening to pull me out or anything like that. Even when there was periods of like unrest or just like unexpected sort of conflict. So it's also important to be mindful of the country that you're going into to see what is the historical aspects of it, whether it's like, is it prone to disasters, is it prone to some political instability, or just like its historical nature. Because I'm very familiar with that, so that didn't really sort of scare me or anything like that. I just knew like, okay, I won't go out to this particular part of the of Haiti like during this week or stuff like that. So so they're very and very hands off. But once again, if you needed something, definitely they were ready to help. But it's definitely an experience where you are the driver and of your own sort of how you want your journey and your experience to be. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, can I just really quickly jump in here as a scholar? I would completely agree with both Elizabeth and Amber. I think that at the end of the day, Borin is a grant. You know, it's not a program. It's not strict teaching in the same way that critical language scholarship might be. It is a program that you design and that they fund. And so a lot of the time, you have to be sort of in charge of your own fate, and they do give you leniency. That being said, and at times that can mean you have to lean more on yourself than at other times, I think. What I will say is that in moments of real crisis, they have been better about helping. And I experienced this firsthand because I was evacuated from my Borin because of the pandemic. I had to come home early, and they helped reimburse my flight, and they also helped find my itinerary when I was trying to get out of Morocco.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And then there's the part of Borin that I feel, at least for me, is what I know Borin most for. Like, you know, it's a language study, and you know that there's a federal service component to it. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe Elizabeth, we'll start with you. Like, how are you navigating the job process in as being an alum of the Borin program?
Yeah, so when I came back from Haiti, I finished my PhD in 2019, and then I entered into funded Fogarty Fellowship. So I I was in Rwanda for a year. So that's one way that I just sort of helped to fulfill that. And then back from Rwanda last year, September, I stayed during the pandemic, and then just also working towards continuing to be involved with NIH with research wise around global mental health research. So it still ties sort of with my mental health project and international development, and if you can spin it away, national security. So it's still in line with expectations that they.
And Gabe, what about you?
Gosh, how am I navigating the job search? That's a fascinating question. Well, I think that the most helpful thing has really been two things. But it's worth prefacing the job search by saying that Bourne does not guarantee you a job. You still have to do a good faith job search. And if you're a scholar, you have 3 years after the completion of your program to find a job, or you need to repay some of your award. So some or all of your award. And so I'm actually still in the process of finding jobs. But what I'll say is two things. I think Borin as a community has been one of the most supportive alumni networks I've ever been a part of. I have found nothing but excellent people in the Borin alumni community. That's true both when I was living back at home, which is Connecticut for me, or where I am now, which is based in Washington, D.C. The other thing I'll say is that I think that Borin does a good job when you're doing the job search of giving you the language you need in order to talk to the people you want to talk to. For example, I think the words direct hiring authorities is a very specific term that actually unlocks a lot of doors in the right circles with the federal government, but that's something you wouldn't necessarily know unless you were paying closer attention to the Boren information. So I've been able to, well, I haven't been able to get a job just yet. What I have been able to do is talk to a number of people who have also told me a little bit more about where I'm looking, told me a little bit more about some tips I could use, and made my own ideas legible to me because they are very smart in their own right.
Awesome. And what about you with Amber, the job process?
Yeah, actually, in addition to what Gabriel was saying, there was, in terms of the alumni network being really great, there was a Boren alum, a woman whose name I can't remember right now, but when she got back from her Boren and she determined that the proper language was not there for hiring, she actually basically worked with Congress to make it codified into, I don't want to say if it's law or into what, but like wrote it so that we can, like the direct hiring authority was understood and that agencies could actually hire Borins using that because people didn't really understand what it was for a while. And I just wanted to give her kudos for doing that work and making that happen. For me, I realized I am, I guess, like the older Borin on the panels. I did my program back in like 2014, 2015. So I have not been in the job search for quite a while. But I will say in terms of when I was applying for the Boren, I knew what I wanted to come out and do. I wanted to work for the federal government. So it was very easy for me to write to that for my application and also like very easy for me to apply for those things after the program because it was very specific. So I actually have completed my service. As soon as I got back, actually, I started an internship, Department of Justice, and it turned into a job. And I managed to complete my my requirement for work, which I do think is a year or 2 years or something like that, pretty simply. And like Gabe said, like a lot of people in our alumni Facebook group are very open to like answering questions about things like that, like what process you went through, getting, how did you speak to this? How did you speak to Boren about your job search if you're having troubles and things like that? So I just think there's a lot of support within the network for the job search.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for sharing. I will say I don't see anything in the question and answer tab, but for those tuning in, feel free to ask questions either in the chat or in the question and answer. We'll be happy to answer. We do have a few minutes left, so I just have a question that I wanted to ask all of you. So Boren is, all about studying a foreign language. And I know studying foreign languages can be kind of like messy and uncomfortable, and you get really shy, and there's a whole like process of kind of being vulnerable a bit that has to do with language study. I know this as a person that has studied Arabic, and I think I studied French in high school. So I just wanted to ask if y'all could share some maybe like uncomfortable or even embarrassing situations that y'all have been, you have some that have to do with like that learning curve that comes with like either you had to put yourself out there to say something that might sound kind of funny or someone misunderstood what you said. Do you have any kind of stories that you'd want to share about those uncomfortable, embarrassing / funny moments of language learning? That's very much a part of Boren. And whoever has something to say can start.
I guess I can start because even though I speak Haitian Creole, it's still with like an American accent a little bit. So I remember there's been situations when I was living in Haiti and still even when I visit that some pronunciation of certain things can take people for a loop like, what do you mean? And I'm like, wait, but this makes sense in my mind. Or after I sort of like slow down to remember how to exactly pronunciate certain things, then I'm able to really get my idea or thoughts across. And then also recognizing that even with Haitian Creole, there are regional differences. Like, yeah, it's a small island of 11 million people, but there's certain words too that, because my family's from the South, when I'm in a central northern area, like the words of like for fish or certain things, like it changes. And I wasn't as cognizant of that until I was like on the ground. I'm like, wait, but this is how my parents have always taught me, to say this or these words. So really it was a learning curve. I had to humble myself, like, okay, this is how you all pronounce it. Okay, so I will try to pronounce it the same way. So especially when trying to bargain with in local markets.
Yeah, the dialects is a very real thing. It's kind of something you forget, that nuance when you're studying a language. It's like, oh, okay, wow, this is only how they speak in the northern region or in the southern region, or in particular for countries that are huge, right, and that have different influences all around.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, one thing I thought about, we had it was actually just a homework assignment for school where we had to explain to a Japanese person, which I use my host family, an idiom in our, I think idiom is the right word, pardon me if it's not, in our native language. An idiom being like a saying that you use, and then also hear a Japanese one from them and kind of try to understand it. And so for some reason I could not think of one, and so the one that automatically came to my mind was two can keep wait three people can keep a secret if two of them are dead. And I had to try to translate that to Japanese to explain it to my host family, to explain what it meant, like what the actual, not what the phrase was, but what it meant. And then also hear if they had any that they could remember. And it was very funny because those are not words that you just normally learn in school when you're learning a language.
Mm-hmm.
They don't teach you about murder. But yeah, so like that was kind of a fun thing for me too, though, actually more so than mistakenly saying things, was like being able to overhear and learn with listening, hearing people who didn't know I spoke Japanese and me trying to like kind of listen and learn from them, like as I was just hearing, like on the train or whatever, things like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
I can add something here. I don't know if I have a particular moment that sticks out to me as more awkward than uncomfortable than other moments, but I will say that there's definitely some discomfort when it comes to the views that I take as an American going into this other country, right? For example, the dominant narrative, the dominant political issue in Morocco is the Western Sahara conflict. And a lot of people in America feel differently than a lot of Moroccans about that topic. And that kind of base level of knowledge can often characterize your interactions in a way that is not, it's not necessarily conscious, because you start out by saying something like, well, Western Sahara is this, and then a Moroccan, one of my Moroccan friends at one point corrected me and said, what are you saying? Western Sahara, that's the Moroccan Sahara. That's not the Western Sahara. And that's the whole conflict, right? And so I think that trying to have a discussion about some of these issues, which are socially taboo, can sometimes be really uncomfortable, especially if it's in a good faith effort to learn a little bit more about the culture and about the context that you're operating in.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, definitely some of the political context things definitely arise more. And you become so much more aware of them in a different light than how people see things here in the US. So, yeah, awesome. I had another question, and feel free if the panelists have any questions for each other, just chime in. Did y'all have a chance to travel to other places around the vicinity where y'all were, since you are abroad? Can you talk about that?
Country or other countries?
Both in country and outside of the host country.
So the thing for Boren is if you leave the country, that time does not count as part of your study. So I think most people who traveled probably traveled like when it was a break between school or something, or like Christmas break or something, when people were already doing that. But I definitely traveled in country as much as I could, like even in country for Japan being like Okinawa, which is you still have to hop on a plane to get there, but it's still considered part of Japan. So yeah, I went as far south as Okinawa, like as far like from the coast where Tokyo is to the opposite coast to I believe it's Asakusa out there, Hiroshima. I went as far as I could.
Yeah. Oh.
Elizabeth, go for it.
Oh no. Yeah. In terms of travel, during the Borin, to let them know every time. So, for me, I already had a conference in South Africa, so actually I left Haiti to go to South Africa, for the conference. And they approved it, but it was just like, oh wow, this is like, and then I had to come back to Haiti, passing through the United States. So they were, yeah, you just had to let them know, but I just didn't. I tried not to travel so much out, like so out. But I did go to South Africa, a totally different region, but it was for a conference presentation. But I did travel a lot in country, attended carnival, and just like different other like cultural, national holidays that were celebrated in different regions.
Yeah, so I think that this was actually one of Boren's strongest aspects for me, just the amount of lenience that it showed. Obviously, there are guidelines for your travel. For example, you're only actually allowed to travel 28 days out of country, and you cannot travel longer than 14 days at a time without explicit approval from your program director. The other thing is that most often they will not approve countries that are above a level 2 in the State Department's travel advisory system. So, for example, I at one point traveled to Spain because Spain is right across from Morocco, across the Strait of Gibraltar. And that travel had to be approved by my college institution because Spain was a level 2 country at that time. And that's something that you will also probably have to do. I'm not sure if this is true as a fellow, so Elizabeth and Amber can correct me if I'm wrong, but as a scholar, I had to clear any travel that was to a level 2 or higher country through my through my undergraduate institution.
Good question. I definitely didn't have to clear anything with my graduate institution. It was like I wasn't a part of them once I left for Boren.
Yeah.
I don't, but definitely everything. No, and also not with my host institution. They didn't care. But definitely had to clear it with Boren. But also for me, like with that little times for breaks that we had, I went to like Australia. Like these are not countries that people are particularly worried about, or like South Korea, which is like basically right a hop, skip, and a jump away. So I don't know if that made a difference. Maybe the location where you are in the world. Yeah, I'm not sure. Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think especially with at the graduate level, like yeah, my institution didn't. I think I only stayed in touch with my advisor, but then and Boren was very flexible. I don't know, it was because of just where I was in my career or academic career as well. So, but it was pretty because I was already in Haiti, like I think it was a level 2 or above. So, so yeah, so they were very open. So maybe it could have been region specific or based upon your institution as well.
That's interesting. I mean, here I'm actually going to go ahead and connect this explicitly to getting a one-on-one tutor, because I think that travel is absolutely something that should be done. On a Borin, you are there to learn a country, to be a cultural, to be, I don't want to say to be a cultural expert, but definitely to get a level of cultural granularity that is a cut above that of a lot of people. And you should travel. And I think that one-on-one tutoring is a great tool to do that, because a lot of the time I was actually able to create a schedule with my tutor that was flexible enough to allow me an extra day to do one thing. And one notable example of that was that right before I got kicked out of Morocco, I actually had the opportunity to spend an extra day in the mountains so that I could summit the tallest mountain in the Arab world. And that was one of the best weekends of my life. And that was something that I don't think I would have been able to do if not for the leniency Boren showed with travel.
I love that. That's awesome. Thanks all for sharing. For me, when I was in the Middle East, so it was a little more complicated. I mean, so was Gabe, or Gabe was Northern Africa. So there's a lot of countries around Jordan that were a no-go. Syria, no-go. Iraq, no-go. Saudi, no-go. So, and Lebanon actually was a no-go, which is why I had to go after. A lot of people wanted to go to Lebanon because people go party in Lebanon. But yeah, the State Department or the commission would always tell us, like, we'll find out if you go. And like, just in case anything happens, you just want to make sure that there's a contact in country. And so if there's no Fulbright commission, then it's better to do it on your own time. And I did. It was grand. But yeah, but I did travel to Oman, which is fine. There's no travel advisory. And then some European
Imagine
country.
right now with COVID too, like most places will be no goes for any of these programs.
Oh yeah.
Worth saying to anyone who's watching right now is this is a common misconception about Boren. Boren is not a Department of State program. Boren is headquartered under the Department of Defense. And that means that oftentimes the travel guidelines really vary. For example, Tunisia and Egypt were both level 2 countries by the time I was in Morocco, which is also a level 2 country. But I actually was not authorized to go to either one when I asked for that. So it really depends. There are different priorities that are pushing these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So just with a few minutes left before I kind of sign off, and I haven't seen any questions yet. So if y'all just want to leave us with just like a few words of advice for those that are looking to apply to Boren, kind of like your takeaway, and yeah, just like kind of what words do you leave anyone watching about the Boren program? And we can start with Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me today, and I hope that this was helpful for our viewers. I think what comes to mind is if you could dream up or envision, a particular project that you would like to, as creative or as untraditional as you can think of it, like just start there. Because for me, I was like, how does national security, mental health, disaster mental health, how does this fit? um but it made sense when I started like really thinking about it and writing it down and getting support from my mentors. So no idea is too like outrageous or too like no. And then also you can go to a country where maybe you are familiar with the language or not so familiar, and they're willing to work with you um with your different language levels. And I think too, sometimes what's not shared often is that, you're going to have your moments depending on how much you've been exposed to that country where you may be homesick, you may have like things that don't go well, or you have to figure out systems. Like it's not all like it's not always a positive experience. So, and then also understanding the country in terms of their own their own history and the influence of colonialism as well. And even though I was in Haiti, like I experienced microaggressions because of my skin complexion. So also being, a little bit preview to how does the country also welcome or engage with people of color is also something to note. And if you can find, once you're there or even before you get there, people you can have these conversations with, because it is a year or so of your life. You do want to make sure that you feel comfortable, safe, or at least aware of the dynamics that BIPOC people may face there. So just my just advice, but all the best with the application, and feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or just want to follow up with us.
What about Amber?
I guess my first recommendation would be definitely apply. Like, don't take yourself out of the running for these programs. There's, even if it's not boring, if it's something else, like what you want to do and what you're trying to accomplish is valid, and you should definitely do it. It helps. It's a new life experience to be able to do this. Commenting on too on what something Elizabeth mentioned, if you're going to a country like, even I'll say even like Japan, where Tokyo is huge, a huge area, but if you travel to the countryside, they might have never seen a person with a different skin complexion or different facial features in their own, and you might feel like an outsider. They might like come over to you and try to take a picture or something. So yeah, just understanding the differences in culture and things like that. And if you can, like, if it's possible to not take offense, if it's unoffensive, just understand, like, you're there to learn and they're also learning. You're helping them learn by also being there, just as you're learning the language, learning their culture. It's an exchange at the end of the day. And the last thing I would say is just contact anyone for questions. Like, reach out, talk to whoever you can about this program or your interest. If you're interested in federal government, like, ask someone who works in the government what they know about this program and how it might help you. And yeah, just do it and enjoy and learn another language.
And then last but not least, Gabe.
Well, if I could echo what Amber said, definitely apply. I think that, was Boren perfect? Of course not. Nothing is perfect. I got kicked out of country. A lot of things happened that I didn't anticipate. A lot of things happened that I didn't want. But was it one of the most incredible learning experiences? Oh, yeah, because I was able to find the time to not only learn this language, but also I actually had quite a bit of free time. I mean, I was able to really think in a way that, just think about my life, think about decisions, what I wanted to do in a way that I don't think I could have with the crush of college, with the crush of high school. And it almost felt like a gap year to me in that sense. So I think being curious, absolutely applying, making sure that you're taking time for yourself is really good. The other two pieces of advice I would give is, number one, definitely try to get out of the expat bubble, because that was mentioned earlier. It is a very, very tempting thing, and it is very easy to find yourself in the American expat bubble. The only time I'm making Morocco and actually really started interacting with them was March of 2020. And I don't think I really need to know what happened, but suffice it to say that those connections went nowhere, because by the time I actually made them, I was on a plane back to the United States. And so definitely value every second you have there. And then the last piece of advice I have is extremely practical, which is, believe what people tell you about bringing warm clothes to a different country. Because I thought to myself the first time I went to Morocco, oh, it's going to be fine in the winter. And then it was 30 degrees, and there's no insulation in Morocco. So if it's 30 degrees outside, it's 30 degrees inside, and you are shivering at night. So believe it when people tell you that you should bring clothes for all seasons.
Bring your black hair care products. another practical recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. Love all that advice. Gabe, that's so funny because I went to Georgia, had to buy a jacket like midwinter, because I was like just piling on my cardigans because I was like, it's gonna be warm here, but no, 4 seasons and no insulation is a real thing. Anyway, thank you so much. That's all the time we have today. It is 10:15, so thank you so much for coming to the What It's Like Boren Award panel. I want to take this time to thank Amber, Gabe, and Elizabeth for speaking with us today. Panelists, if you're comfortable, if you don't mind dropping your email in the chat for attendees, if they need to contact you with any further questions. And then lastly, guests, please check your email inboxes on Monday for our conference survey. It'll help us with funding and improvements for next year. The next panel for our conference will be the LGBTQ Identity Abroad panel at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So once again, thank you so much. And that's all we have for you today. So have a great rest of your Saturday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.